Food was uncertain. Each morning began the same way. Hunger, not the hunger of a missed meal, but a deep, familiar emptiness that lived in your belly like a second heartbeat. The kind of hunger that slowed your thoughts and made your movements cautious, because every bit of energy had to be saved, rationed, guarded like an ember. Your home, built of stone smoke, and the smell of living bodies pressed close together. The cave itself was not spacious, perhaps 15 paces deep at its longest, 8 paces across at its widest. The ceiling sloped downward toward the back, where the children and the eldest slept, where the air was coldest but at least out of the wind. The entrance faced northeast, which meant in winter it never received direct sunlight. An unfortunate position, but caves are not chosen, they are found, occupied, defended. Previous occupants had left their marks. The walls were blackened by decades, perhaps centuries of fire. In the dim light, if you looked closely, you could find scratches and grooves where others had sharpened stone tools here or carved signs whose meaning was now lost. Perhaps prayers, perhaps just the work of restless hands on endless winter nights. A curtain of hides hung over the entrance. Reindeer, bison, and wolf skins sewn together with fine. The hides were useful if they slowed the wind but did not stop it. Air found its way through fur and left it like water through fingers. You always felt it, that stubborn cold, endlessly seeking a way in. In the worst blizzards, snow would pile against the entrance until the curtain bowed inward, heavy and frozen. Someone had to go out. It was always someone who had to go out, dig a path, push the snow aside, maintain the opening, because a sealed cave, no matter how worn it felt at the moment, became a tomb when thick smoke had nowhere to go and breath had nowhere to escape. The fire burning in the center of everything. It sat in a shallow pit, ringed with stones collected in summer and autumn. Around the hearth, the ground was bare, hard minus act dirt, trodden smooth by countless feet, warm to the touch even when the rest of the cave was stone minus cold. That warmth, its value was beyond measure. Here the clan gathered, cooked, made tools, told stories with gestures and soft words. The fire had to be small. It could only be small. Fuel was scarce. Every twig, every chunk of wood, every piece of dried dung or bone had to be counted. Fire that burned too brightly was a fire that would die too soon. So, it just smoldered, sending up a steady gray column that climbed to the ceiling, spread along the rock, and eventually found its way out. Most of the smoke never truly left. It settled into everything: your hair, your skin, your furs, the cave walls themselves. After a few weeks of winter living, you forgot the taste of clean air. You breathed smoke as you breathed the cold itself. A matter of course. As always done, some of the elders were nearly blind from a lifetime of it, their eyes clouded, weeping, seeing only vague shapes and shadows. But the alternative to smoke was freezing. So, you breathed it, lived in it, accepted it. The walls sweated. A strange fact of winter cave life. In the day, when people moved about, when mouths exhaled, when the fire burned steadily, moisture condensed on the cold stone. Droplets formed, ran, pooled in small puddles at the cave's edges. By morning, those droplets froze into delicate ice crystals, beautiful and useless. Sometimes children touched them with curious fingers. Sometimes they pressed a palm against a bloom of ice minus flowers on the wall. But mostly, everyone ignored them. They were just another face of the cold, something to be lived with, not changed. Around the hearth, sleeping areas were divided by custom and seniority. The strongest hunters slept in the warmest spots, closest to the flame. Women and children occupied the middle ground. The old and the sick, those who could not hunt or gather effectively, found their places at the back of the cave, where the cold settled like still water. From a distance, this arrangement might seem cruel, but it was practical. The hunters had to wake rested. Their arms had to be strong, their minds clear. A failed hunt meant suffering for all. Everyone understood this. Even those who slept in the cold accepted the logic of survival. Yet, on the coldest nights, these distinctions blurred. Bodies pressed close regardless of status. Children curled between adults. An injured hunter might find himself surrounded by women sharing warmth, accepting their care. Sometimes, though no one spoke of it aloud, even the strongest hunter would quietly move to the back, wrapping his body around an elder who shook too hard, had grown too thin, needed warmth more than pride. The day began before dawn, though in deep winter, dawn was a relative concept. Someone had to be first awake. Usually the fire minus keeper, the role that rotated among the women, occasionally held by a skilled elder man. The fire minus keeper slept lightly, waking every few hours through the night to add fuel, tend the embers to prevent the most catastrophic failure. Fire going out completely, it was possible to restart a fire. With a bow minus drill or a hand minus drill, dry ender, patient friction, sparks could be struck from flint and stone, but it took time. Sometimes, depending, and in deep winter, hours without fire could mean frostbite, hypothermia, death, so the fire must not go out, was not allowed to go out. The fire minus keeper rose in the dark, moving silently through the sleeping clan, kneeling by the embers. She let us assume it was she. On this morning blew gently on the coals, watching orange light revive beneath the ash. He added moss, then tiny twigs, letting the heat build gradually. The smoke grew thick. People shifted in their sleep, coughed softly. As the flames gained strength, she added slightly larger sticks. Never many. Just enough to spread a small circle of warmth through the cave. Just enough to take the killing edge off the cold. Others began to stir. The hunters rose first, groaning softly as cold minus stiffened joints protested movement. They were mostly younger men, 15 to 30 winters old. Some bore scars, claw marks from a fighting lynx, badly healed breaks from falls on ice, old spear minus wound scars from skirmishes with another clan over territory. They sat by the fire, silent and intent, chewing on dried meat saved from yesterday's meager meal. They checked their weapons, long spears with stone points lashed to wooden shafts with sinew and resin. They tested the bindings, looking for any looseness, any weakness. A spear that failed on a hunt could mean injury. Injury, for a hunter and perhaps for the whole clan, could mean death. As the hunters prepared, others began their own work. When it moved to the entrance, carefree pushing aside the heavy hide curtain, trying to minimize the gust of biting air that rushed in. Outside, snow had piled against the opening again. It always did. They dug and shoveled with reined ear-shoulder blades worn smooth from endless repetition of this same task, clearing a narrow path. The wind hit them instantly, shocking even through layers of fur, even moving quickly, its tall breath numbed exposed skin and heartbeats. They worked fast, scooping, piling snow to the side, maintaining the lifeline between cave and world. Inside, the others handled other necessities. They sorted through stored supplies, dried meat trapped in hides and hung from the ceiling, safe from rodents. They checked water stores and containers of hollowed minus out logs, a tightly woven basket sealed with pitch. Water in winter was surprisingly difficult to get. Snow had to be melted carefully in hide bags, heated with stones warmed in the fire. A tedious process but vital. Children old enough helped with small tasks. They gathered kindling from the canes, supplied bough twigs, bark, and dry moss collected in autumn and stored in the shelter's driest corner. They learned it by watching, by imitation, by gentle correction when they made mistakes. Some children showed a talent for tool minus making. They sat by the fire with flint cores and hammer stones, learning the ancient art of knapping. They watched the elders' hands how to hold the stone, how to strike, how to release a perfect flake with one blow or ruin the whole piece. The thud of stone on stone echoed softly in the cave. Tap, 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 tap. Rhythm as old as human thought, repeated endlessly, passed down like the fire itself, generation to generation. Warmth was not a given. It was something you had to fight for, constantly through every winter day, every moment. The fire helped, but the fire was a sun with short arms. Stand 2 steps away. You felt moderate warmth. Stand 5 steps away. You might as well be outside. The cold was not uniform. It pulled in coinage, clung to rack, radiated from the cave walls like reverse heat. So, you stayed close. Everyone stayed close. During the day, work kept you moving, and movement generated internal heat. Scraping hides, carving tools, preparing food, these tasks engaged muscles, created warmth from within. At night, an activity ceased. When the clan settled to sleep, the cold revealed its predatory nature. Winter sleep was communal by necessity. You lay near others, sometimes pressed directly against them. Children were placed in the middle of the sleepers, surrounded by adult bodies. They complained, sometimes too hot, to confined, unable to move freely. But this was safety. This was survival. A child who rolled away in sleep, who lay alone at the cold edge, might not wake in the morning. The furs you lay under were heavy, dense, layers of reindeer hide with the hair on, wolf pelts, bison robes. The furs had been imperfectly treated in warmer months with brains and smoke. They were still stiff. They smelled strongly of the animals they came from, mixed with wood smoke, human sweat, and the faint soreness of imperfect preservation. The fur was always itchy, always. Tiny hairs worked their way into your skin. Sometimes, tiny parasites, lice, fleas made homes in the furs and visited human bodies. You scratched absently during the day, accepting the discomfort as part of existence. But without these furs, you would die. So you wore them, lay under them, wrapped yourself in them until you too resembled the animals that came from it. On the coldest nights, when even layers of fur and shared body heat felt insufficient, the clan sometimes led animals and not prey, but companions. The dogs that followed the clan half-minus wild, wolf-minus descended creatures were invited into the sleeping area. They curled against human bodies, adding their own warmth to the collective heat. Some stories were old in hushed tones, about desperate winters when injured wolves were kept inside the cave. The warmth was more valuable than the meat they represented. Whether these stories were true, no one could say, but the principle was understood: warmth was warmth, regardless of source. Frostbite was common. You learned to recognize the signs: early fingers or toes turning white, then gray, losing all sensation. At first it felt like a blessing, no more aching cold, but you knew better. Loss of sensation meant tissue was dying. The treatment was gradual, rewarming, painful and dangerous. Sometimes flesh recovered. Sometimes it turned black and slough off, leaving a stumped finger. You found this on the elders' missing toes, hands with incomplete fingers, ears shriveled to small scarred knots. For Max's survival, every piece of lost flesh represented a winter endured. A cold night survived. A time death came close but didn't take you. You tried to prevent it. You wrapped your limbs carefully. You checked fingers and toes each time you came in from the cold outside. You watched others, and when you saw the telltale white patches forming, you warned them. But prevention was perfect. Winter was patient, thorough. It took its toll from almost everyone. In winter, words became sparse. Speaking required breath, and breath was exhaled heat, carried away on vapor. So, the clan communicated in other ways: gestures, looks, touch. A raised hand meant wait. A pointed finger meant look there. A hand on a shoulder could mean well done, or I see you struggling, or simply you are not alone. This economy of language created a unique intimacy. You learned to read faces in firelight, to interpret the subtle shifts that revealed hunger, pain, exhaustion, or resolve. You grew so attuned to other stakes. Words could never have achieved this. Silence, too, became meaningful. The comfortable quiet of people working, the soft sounds of tools and tasks, the crackle of fire, the wind outside. This was effortless companionship, connection without demands. But tension existed. Hunger made people irritable. When rations ran short, when hunts failed repeatedly, and stored food dwindled faster than the winter passed, tempers frayed. Small disputes arose: who had taken more than their share, who hadn't pulled their weight fairly, who had made a careless mistake that cost the group. These conflicts had to be handled carefully. The clan was too small for lasting rifts. Disputes were settled quickly, sometimes by elder mediation, sometimes simply because the energy to sustain anger ran out. Physical violence was rare, strongly discouraged. An injury weakened the whole group. Nigh broken bone, a deep cut, even a severe bruise reduced a person's ability to contribute to survival. The clan couldn't afford that waste, so anger was swallowed. Resentments buried, cooperation continued because cooperation was life. Yet within this harsh pragmatism, tenderness existed. You saw it in small moments, a mother checking a child's hands for frostbite, could touch gentle despite her own exhaustion. A hunter quietly sharing his meager portion of meat with an elder who could no longer hunt, doing it without show, without drawing attention. A younger person keeping vigil with a fading elder at night, listening to stories told in gestures and fragments, offering presents in the dark hours. There were rituals of endurance. Some clans hummed together before sleep. Not a real song, just rhythmic sounds for comfort. The tune, if you could call it. It was simple, ancient. No one knew who first made the hum. Perhaps it arose spontaneously, born of shared need, shaped by 1,000 throats across 1,000 winters. The hum settled into the smoke, mingled with the fire's crackle, became part of the cave's night atmosphere. Children fell asleep to it. Others closed their eyes and let it carry them toward rest. Some nights, carved bones were brought out, small pieces of antler or mammoth ivory, etched with marks that might be tallies or symbols. They were readed reverently, passed from hand to hand, then buried under the hearth before sleep. Perhaps a ritual for luck, perhaps just a way to seek a sliver of control over things that could not be controlled. When death came, it was acknowledged quietly. An elder who didn't wake one morning, a child who grew cold despite being wrapped in warmth, a hunter who didn't return from the frozen landscape. The body was treated carefully, wrapped in furs, carried outside the camp, sometimes placed in a shallow pit covered with stones. At a deep burial, the ground was too frozen for that, but enough to protect from immediate scavenging. On the night after someone died, before sleep, the dead person's name was spoken. Just once, a whisper around the fire, not a grand ceremony, just recognition. Memory, acknowledgement that this person had existed, contributed, mattered. That knife went gone because it had to. Not every moment was struggle. Not every hour was suffering. Sometimes, conditions aligned, creating moments of near-minus comfort. Sometimes, the hunt was spectacularly successful. The death was taken, meat brought back fire than the clan could immediately consume. On such nights, the fire was fed generously. Mammoth bones burned hot and long, the marrow melting out rich, nutritious fat, the cave filled with warmth, reaching even to the farthest corners. On these nights, bellies were full. The constant gnawing hunger retreated, replaced by a heavy satisfaction. People sat up straighter, instead of curling against the cold. They spoke more freely. Perhaps someone began a story, not the survival lessons elders passed to youth, but a real tale, a hunting adventure full of danger and humor, a memory of summer, a fantasy of spring's return. Children laughed, a strange, almost forgotten sound. They played briefly by the fire, their shadows casting huge, dancing shapes on the walls, until exhaustion pulled them toward sleep. You sat, watching the flames, feeling warmth so kin to your bones. For this one night, winter felt bearable, more than bearable, conquered. When fresh bones were added, the fire spat sparks. These bright orange motes rose into the smoke, drifted upward toward the ceiling, vanished into darkness. They were like dying little stars. Each one was a momentary brightness before extinction. You watched them rise, vanish, rise, vanish. The repetition was hypnotic, calming. For this brief moment on this fragile island of warmth in a sea of cold, hope felt possible. Tomorrow, the cold would return, hunger would return, the endless work of survival would continue. But tonight, the fire burned bright. Tonight, there was warmth. Tonight, you were alive. And that was enough. Minus spark to the life of Kaura. Let us turn our attention to a single life. Among the countless people who lived and died in the Ice Age, who left no names on stone, no monuments to mark their passing, one voice. We will call her. Kaura was 16 winters old when she became the clan's primary fire keeper. Her role was not chosen by ceremony or announcement. It simply happened. The previous fire keeper, her mother's sister, grew too ill to maintain the night watch. Her cough disturbed the clan's fleet, her hands shook trying to add fuel. So, quietly, naturally, Kaura began to wake in the dark hours, to tend what must be tended. At first, it felt temporary. Surely her aunt would recover. Surely the responsibility would return to older, more experienced hands. But winter deepened. Her aunt did not get better. Gradually, without words, the clan accepted the shift. Kaura was now the fire keeper. This is her burden, her sacred charge. The fire must not go out. This truth lit in her chest like a feckin' heartbeat. She felt it waking, eating, lying down to sleep. The fire must not go out. Everything else, hunger, exhaustion, pain, was secondary to this absolute command. If the fire went out, lighting it was an ordeal that could consume an entire day. She had seen it happen only once, when she was small, a freak gust of wind through the cave mouth scattering embers beyond recovery. She remembered the elders working frantically with fire bows, spinning winged drill shafts against wooden bases, creating etch and heat, desperate hope for a spark. She remembered how long it took, how cold the cave grew with each passing hour, how the children were wrapped in every fur that could be found and held close, how people's breath turned visible even inside the shelter. She remembered the collective sigh when smoke finally called from the tinder bundle, when flame was reborn from near nothing. He would not let that happen on her watch, had not let it happen. So she slept differently now. No longer the deep, surrendering sleep of childhood, but a shallower rest, forever half awake. Her mind kept count without conscious effort about 2 hours since the last fueling. Time to wake. Time to add fuel. He rose in total darkness, so dark she couldn't see her own hands. But she knew the cave's geography by touch and memory. 3 steps forward, a slight turn left, 2 more steps, and her feet found the warm earth near the hearth. She knelt. The embers glowed faintly, deep red under a crust of gray white ash. She could feel their heat against her face. Weak, freshest. He blew gently, once, twice. Orange light bloomed beneath the ash, revealing the fire's coal heart. She added dry moss, watched it smoke, then catch with a soft whisper of flame. 10 tiny twigs, arranged carefully to allow air flow. The flames grew, casting wavering shadows on the walls. Around her, people slept undisturbed. As it should be, her work was invisible, successful only when no one noticed. She added slightly larger sticks, never too many, always counting, always aware of limited stores, watching until the flames settled. Then she returned to her sleeping place, lay down, drifted back into the strange half sleep that would break again into hours. This was her rhythm now. This was her life. Her hair always smelled of smoke. Not the pleasant scent of an occasional campfire, but the deep, ingrained smell of constant exposure. She tasted it on her tongue upon waking, bitter woody. Sarah's skin took on a faint grayish cast from the smoke, her eyes always watering, leaving tracks in the soot including the soot that fell on her face. Her hands developed new cuttingses in new places, from holding fuel, from the specific grips required to arrange kindling in the dark without disturbing the sleeping clan. Her fingertips were sometimes lightly burned from pieces that were hotter than expected. But these were small prices, acceptable prices. The fire lived. The clan survived. That was enough. Kaura did not think of herself as important. The concept would have seemed strange to her, almost meaningless. She was simply doing what must be done. Others hunted. Others gathered. Others scraped hides, napped and flint. Tended children. She tended the fire. Every role was necessary. Every role was part of the whole. But, in the deep night, sitting alone by the embers while others slept, her thoughts wandered to places she couldn't quite name. She watched the fire as if it were alive and away. It was consuming, growing, waning, needing constant care like any living thing. Sometimes, she found herself speaking to it. Silent lip minus movements, murmurs of comfort or encouragement. Stay, she whispered to the flames. Stay with us. The fire, of course, did not answer, but it seemed to listen. As long as she fed it, it burned on, loyal in its own way. Her dreams, when they came in the brief moments of deepest sleep, worst range, fragmented. She dreamed of walking in snow that never ended. She dreamed of mammoths moving slowly across a white plain, a task sketching the pale daylight. She dreamed of her mother, dead 3 winters now and a tomb fully alive as she had been scarred hands, smoke-mazed gray hair, eyes that somehow conveyed both weariness and tenderness. Sometimes she dreamed of the fire itself, flames dancing with purpose, forming shapes that were almost recognizable, then dissolving back into chaos. She woke from these dreams unsettled, though she couldn't say why. In waking moments, she developed a private mythology around the fire. Hey. Not something she would speak aloud. Hey. Just thoughts that gave her comfort during her long, lonely watches. She began to believe the fire had memory. Not exactly human memory, but something older. Every time fuel was added, every time life was breathed back into dying embers, the fire remembered. It remembered every hand they had ever fed it. All the way back to the beginning, to the first where, when the first person discovered fire could be saved, maintained, kept alive, in the cold dark. The hearth her clan used had been active for generations. The ashes beneath today's flames contained the ashes of her grandmother, her grandmother's mother, ancestors whose names were lost but whose care existed in the very structure of the hearth. When she fed the fire, she was adding to that lineage. He was adding her effort to an unbroken chain of efforts, stretching back beyond memory. This idea comforted her in her hardest watches, when weariness made her hands clumsy, when the cold seemed to press from all sides, when she questioned if she had the strength to continue. She was not alone. She had never been alone. Every fire minus keeper before her lived on in these flames, in this ritual of care. The winter Kaura was 19 was especially brutal. Snow fell without stopping for 8 days. It piled against the entrance until digging became dangerous. The snow was so deep, so heavy, it could collapse inward, trapping those inside. Hunters could not go out. Visibility was only a few arm-minus lengths in the white storm. To venture out in such conditions was suicide. Easy to get disoriented, lose strip bearings, freeze in minutes. Though the clan waited, eating stored food, watching a supplies window, a meat hanging from the ceiling grew thinner. What had been a respectable supply of dried reindeer and bison was now reduced to tough strips that had to be carefully portioned among many mouths. Hunger grew sharp, children cried more often, adults moved slower, conserving energy. Elders ate less, insisting the younger, stronger members needed the food more. A gesture both generous and practical. The clan's future survival depended on those who could still hunt, gather, bear children. The hunters paced like caged animals frustrated by forced idleness. They checked their weapons over and over, as if preparation alone could change the weather. They stood at the cave mouth, staring into the white chaos, looking for any break in the storm. None. 8 days, 9, 10. The fire became even more critical. It was the clan center, its comfort, its source of warmth when bellies were empty and hot within. That the fuel supply, like the food, was finite. Kaura watched the woodpile shrink, saw it approach the threshold where rationing would have to become more severe. She began to burn smaller fires, just enough to prevent freezing, not enough to provide real comfort. People huddled closer. Complaints were few. Everyone understood necessity. But she could see the pain in their eyes, the way they wrapped their furs tighter, the way they shivered even inside the shelter. On the 12th day, the storm finally stopped. The hunters left immediately, desperate, driven by the knowledge that the clan could not last much longer without fresh meat. It left before dawn, returned after dark, empty minus handed. No game to be found. All animals had either hidden during the storm or migrated to lower ground. The next day, the day after, the same. Hera continued tending the fire, but now she faced impossible choices. The wood supply was almost gone. She began to burn old tool handles, broken spear shafts, the hafts of worn hand minus axes, items that could have been repaired, reused. But survival demanded sacrifice. No one protested. Everyone understood. Yet the hunts continued to fail. Animals were either scattered, dead, or gone too far, requiring days of travel the clan could not afford. Here I stared at the remaining few. The couple of days at Mormelburn, perhaps 3 if she kept the fire barely alive. After that, she made it to fish in without consulting anyone. This was her responsibility, the burden she carried. That night when others slept, she took her sleeping board, fat piece of wood she lay on to keep her body slightly off the cold cave floor. It was precious to her. She'd spent days finding the right piece of driftwood by a summer river, worn out a good stone knife shaping it smooth. It was one of the few things that belonged to her alone. She split it into pieces, fed it to the fire. The wood was thick, well minus dried. The bread hadn't steady, defended clan hours of real warmth on a particularly difficult night. Afterward, she slept on bare earth, waking with cold seeping deeper into her bones than usual. But the fire had lived through the night. That was what mattered. In the days that followed, she burned other personal items. A carved bone shed played with as a child, a particularly good scraping knife, a wooden cup shed carved herself, the sacrifice's worst island private. No one exactly noticed what she added to the flames. I only saw the fire continue, the warmth persist even as stores dwindled. On the 18th day, the hunters finally succeeded. They brought down a young mammoth, separated from its herd, weakened by the storm. It was not large, but it was meat, fat, and bone, enough to pull the clan back from the edge of starvation. That night, the nath bones fueled the fire. The cave filled with warmth. People ate until satisfied, and Kaura, sitting by the fire shed, kept alive through the hardest stretch, watched sparks rise into the dark, feeling exhaustion settle over her like a heavy fur. Eventually, someone would carve her a new sleeping board, or she would carve one herself. When spring came and there was time for such things. But for now, bare earth was enough. The cold was bearable. The fire had survived. The clan had survived. This was her purpose. This was her gift. Winter was long, and in its depths, humans showed their truest selves. Kaura noticed things others might miss. He was awake during quiet moments, witnessing vulnerabilities concealed by daylight. She saw the elder who sometimes couldn't sleep at night, who sat up staring into the flames with an expression of profound sadness. She never asked why that was her place, but she made sure on those nights the fire burned a little brighter, offering what comfort she could give. She saw the young mother rocking a baby with particular desperation, singing silent songs, trying to soothe the crying child she couldn't satisfy because of her own hunger. Kaura made sure that woman sat closest to the fire, receiving the tiny extra warmth that might ease the baby's discomfort. He saw hunters subtly, almost secretively sharing their portions, taking from their own meager rations to supplement a companion who looked weaker than them. These small acts of care, like water through stone cracks, slowly, quietly, shaped everything over time. One hunter in particular drew her attention, though she tried not to show it. In her mind, his name was Taran. He was perhaps 20 winters old, tall and lean, built for endurance rather than bulk like many hunters. He had a scar on his left cheek from a past encounter. His hands were always slightly nicked from weapon minus work. He was the strongest hunter, not the boldest, but he was steady, reliable. He brought back food more consistently than the more flashy hunters who succeeded spectacularly. but often failed, and she noticed him because of his hands. During a particularly cold snap when she was 20 winters old, Taran returned from a hunt with fingers stiffened white. Early frostbite, clearly. He tried to hide it, tucking his hands into his furs, but Kaura saw. Without a word, she gestured him to the fire. He hesitated. The fire minus space was precious, already crowded with children and elders who needed warmth most. She gestured again, more insistently, and he came. She took his hands in hers, gentle, careful. They were ice, barely functional. She held them over the embers, not too close that would damage the tissue further, but close enough for heat to begin seeping into frozen flesh. He watched her face as she worked. She could feel his gaze, but she kept her focus on his hands, pouring warmth into them, monitoring the color returning to his fingertips. They did not speak. Around them, the clan rendered out its evening routine, preparing for sleep, handling small tasks, murmuring softly. The fire crackled. Smoke rose. Wind howled outside. Gradually, painfully, sensation returned to his fingers. She could see it in his wince, his clenched jaw. The return of feeling was agony. Worse than the previous numbness. But it meant he was alive, meant he would keep his fingers. When she finally released his hands, he flexed them slowly, testing. Then he looked at her, truly looked, and something passed between them that had no name in any language. Not exactly love, not yet, but recognition, gratitude, an acknowledgement that she had seen him vulnerable unhelped, without judgment, without demand. He went back to his place among the hunters. She went back to her fire minus keeping duties. Life continued as before, but afterward, she noticed him noticing her. He made sure she got a fair portion when meat was distributed. He brought her particularly good kindling when he found it on hunts. Small gestures, easily missed by others, but meaningful to her. They rarely spoke directly. There was no privacy in the cave, no chance for conversation that didn't involve the whole clan, but their communication existed in glances, small courtesies, the way they oriented toward each other even while performing different tasks. For now it was enough. One especially cold night, when even group sleeping was barely adequate for warmth, she woke to find him sleeping near her spot by the fire. Not inappropriately close, the fire minus area was communal space, but closer than strictly necessary. He understood he was offering his warmth, his presence, his protection in the small way he could. That night, she added a little extra fuel, let the fire burn a bit brighter, weighing them both more thoroughly than rationing usually allowed. A small luxury was her response, her acknowledgement, her gift. Outside, the wind screamed across the frozen plain. Inside, to people shared warmth by a fire older than memory, finding, in each other, a reason to keep the flames burning for one more night. Spring came eventually. It always did, though each winter made you doubt. Kaura lived to see 20-3 winters, then 20-4, 20-5. Years blurred, marked by the same rhythms: cold, hunger, endurance, relief. She and Taran became a pair, acknowledged by the clan. They shared foes. They worked in comfortable silence. When she bore children, first a daughter, then a son, his gentle ways with them surprised her, his scarred hunter's hands carefully cradling the tiny bodies. But Otter learned fire minus keeping by watching, by helping with small tasks, absorbing the rhythms of night, minus watches and careful rationing. Her son became a hunter, following his father out on expeditions, learning the patient skills of tracking, waiting, striking at the perfect moment. Kaura's hair grayed early, though she remained strong. Smoke had marked her. Her hands were permanently scarred from countless small burns. She had the cladded quality of someone who had breathed too much smoke for too long. The fire under her watch never went out once. It was her pride, though she would never say it aloud. In her 30-first winter in age few reached, she developed the coughing sickness. At first subtle, a tickle in her throat, as slight wheeze when breathing, but it progressed, grew deeper, more persistent. Some nights she coughed so violently she couldn't tend the fire. Heard Otto had to take over the duty. He knew what it meant, had seen it before. the kind of cough that settled in the lungs and did not leave. She continued working as long as she could, but gradually, inevitably, the responsibility fully transferred to her daughter. The transition happened naturally, silently, just as Kaura herself had become fire minus keeper. One night, during a winter that was neither particularly harsh nor particularly mild, she lay down to sleep and did not wake again. No drama, no last words, just breath quietly ceasing, a life extinguishing as gently as an ember fading to ash. The clan mourned her in their quiet way. Her body was wrapped in the best furs they could spare, carried outside the camp to the burial ground. Ferran walked beside her wrapped form, one hand resting on it, his face expressionless with a deep grief. He laid her beside an old hearth abandoned years ago when the clan moved to another cave in the valley. It seemed fitting to let her rest by fire, even in death. But before covering her with stones, someone, perhaps her daughter, perhaps Duran, perhaps one of the elders, placed a few charred sticks beside her body, 6 of them, carefully arranged. A tiny gesture, simple, but it carried meaning. She fed the flames. She kept us warm. She sacrificed her sleep so we could rest safely. After she was gone, her daughter kept the watch through that winter, and many winters after. She taught her own daughter the art of night-watches, careful rationing, breathing life into dying embers. Kaura's story slowly became legend, and not a grand epic, but a quiet remembrance. When women gathered to work hides, perhaps someone would say she kept the fire alive through the great storm. Others would nod, remembering, or having heard the story from their mothers. Eventually, a tradition developed when a new fire minus keeper took up the role. She would be given a piece of charred wood from the main fire, they called it Kaura's ember. This charcoal was kept safe, carried when the clan moved to seasonal camps, used to light new fires when needed. It was said that every fire the clan that contained a spark from the fire Kaura had tended, her breath, blown across coals 300 generations ago, still lived in the warmth that kept them alive. This was not literally true. Fire was just fire, a chemical process, oxygen meaning fuel. But humans are never content with literal truth. They need meaning. They need connection to those who came before. So, the tradition persisted. Kaura's ember was passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, a tangible link to the woman who had given her sleep, her comfort, her health, her life to warm others. In the archaeological record, she does not exist. No name carved in stone, no monument, no epitaph survives, but in the ash layers of ancient cave floors, her work remains. The blackened earth, the fragments of charcoal, the circular arrangements of fire minus cracked stones marking where hearths once burned. Season after season, year after year, someone tending those fires. Someone waking in the dark. Someone sacrificing sleep and comfort to keep the flame alive. Her name was Kaura, or it might have been, for it might have been something else entirely, in a language no human ear will ever hear again. She was real, and what she could mattered. The fire survived, the cleanse survived, and the memory of that care persists, buried in ash waiting to be discovered. Across Europe, in caves that once sheltered our ancestors, archaeologists are working with brushes and sieves, with patience and meticulous records, uncovering the traces winter left behind. They are finding hearths, hundreds, thousands of them. These are not dramatic finds. No golden masks, no grand tombs, no treasures to make headlines or fill museum galleries with crowds. Just blackened earth, rings of stones cracked by heat, layers of ash compressed by millennia into deep, dark strata. Speaking, if you know how to listen, of countless cold nights endured. Each hearth represents a fire that once burned. Each fire represents human hands tending it, human breath coaxing life from it, human need to keep a flame alive through the long dark. The process of finding a hearth is often unspectacular. Moray, a slight discoloration in the soil, a concentration of charcoal, stones that cracked in a unique pattern from repeated heating and cooling. To an untrained eye, these features might look like natural variations in dirt, hardly worth a second glance. But to an archaeologist who has spent years learning the subtle language of stratigraphy, each hearth is a revelation. The ash itself is a text, but written in chemistry, not words. Archaeologists can analyze these ash layers with astonishing precision. They can determine what was burned, types of wood, animal bones, plant material. They can identify the temperature at which the fire burned, revealing how well it was tended, how much fuel was available, how desperate or relatively comfortable the occupants might have been. Modern analysis techniques allow researchers to extract a staggering amount of information from what looks like uniform gray powder. So microscopy reveals the cell structure of charred wood, identifying tree species. Pine burns differently from oak. Birch leaves residues distinct from willow. Each tree species represents a choice, a decision about what fuel to gather, what the surrounding environment offered. They find microscopic traces of food preparation, fat molecules soaked into the soil, protein residues on cooking stones. They find evidence of tool miners making tiny stone flakes, bone fragments with cut marks, polish from long minus term handling. Fat molecules are especially informative. Different animals produce fats with distinct chemical signatures. Mammoth fat is different from reindeer fat, which is different from fish fat. By analyzing the lipid profiles preserved in hearth sediments, researchers can determine what was cooked, and therefore what was hunted, what was available, what sustained these communities through winter. From the distribution of these materials, from the spatial relationships between hearths and sleeping areas, work areas and storage areas, patterns emerge. And patterns tell stories. Ray hearth with multiple layers of ash, each carefully cleaned and rebuilt upon the last, suggests long minus term habitation, perhaps a winter camp, a turn to year after year, because it offered shelter, water, proximity to game migration routes. That continuity of ash layers speaks of intention planning, of people who knew they would return and prepared for it. Some hearths show signs of almost obsessive careful maintenance. Ashes swept to the edges, stones rearranged to optimize heat reflection, new fuel added in ways that showed deep understanding of combustion dynamics. These were not casual campfires lit and forgotten. These were fires, continually attended to. The kind of devotion we today might reserve for something precious and fragile. A hearth surrounded by a dense scatter of stone tools suggests a place where people gathered, worked while warming themselves, integrating the fire's social and practical functions into the daily rhythm. The tools themselves tell stories. Scrapers for processing hides, blades for cutting meat, spear points for tomorrow's hunt. Each tool represents hours of labor, hands striking stone with patience and skill, fingers warming by the fire while minds focused on the angle of each strike. At some sites, researchers find what are called debitage piles, the waste flakes from tool minus making. Thousands of tiny stone chips, their distribution patterns revealing where people sat, how they oriented themselves relative to the fire and to each other. A concentration of flakes to the red of a height suggests a rate minus handed napper. Multiple concentrations suggest several people working simultaneously, perhaps eaching, perhaps just sharing space and warmth. Charcoal preserved in the ash can be radioactive dated, giving absolute ages. This fire burned 28,000 years ago. That one, 23,000 years ago. Another 15,000 years ago. These dates are hanging in themselves. 28,000 years, a number almost unfathomable. It spans a length of time that encompasses all of recorded history, the rise and fall of countless civilizations, all of human history that has ever been written down, and then stretches back another 20,000 years. When we map these dates, we see something extraordinary. The same cave, the same shelter, used repeatedly over millennia, not continuously. Climate shifts, resource availability, human migration patterns meant sites were occupied, abandoned, occupied in cycles. That the cave itself remained, offering the same basic shelter it had offered countless generations before. The limestone that formed these caves is hundreds of millions of years old. The caves themselves may have existed for hundreds of thousands of years. And for a brief geological moment, though an immense one in human terms, they became containers for human life, human struggle, human warmth. In southern France, in a cave system known as the Grotte du Renne, excavations revealed something especially poignant. Beneath the modern floor, beneath centuries of sediment, they found a Paleolithic floor surface, the actual ground people walked on 30,000 years ago. And on that surface, preserved perfectly under the cave's specific conditions, were footprints. Not many, just a few, pressed into clay that had been soft then, hardened over time, and was eventually buried and protected by sediment. The discovery was accidental, as many profound archaeological finds are. A team member noticed an unusual depression in exposed sediment layer. Further careful excavation revealed unmistakable toe-minus prints, the press of a forefoot, with slight pressure gradient indicating weight distribution during walking. The footprints were small, thiefed, and 5 analysis, a child's foot, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. The child had walked from the cave entrance toward the back where the hearth would have burned, and then walked back. The kid showed no signs of distress, just ordinary walking, a child moving through familiar space. Gait analysis showed confidence. No hesitation, no stumbling. This child knew this space, had walked this path countless times. This child, dead for 30,000 years. The footprints remain. When the researchers published their findings, they included precise measurements, scientific analysis, discussions of sedimentary processes and preservation conditions. They analyzed the clay composition that allowed the prints to survive. They studied the stratigraphic sequence that determined when the prints were covered. They used 3D laser scanning to create precise digital models, but they also included photographs. And anyone seeing those photographs sees not data, but humanity. The child walking home. A child walking toward warmth. A child who lived, played, perhaps complained about chores, looked up at the stars. The footprints were made in winter. We know this because the case says clear seasonal habitation pattern and template used during cold months. Largely abandoned in summer when the crate moved to open-air camps at lower elevations. Seasonal patterns can be read in animal remains. Bones from winter-killed animals have different markings than those from summer kills. Trained ear antlers found in the cave are in developmental stages that occur only in cold months. The few plant remains preserved are from species that grew or were gathered in autumn and early winter. So, on some winter day 30,000 years ago, this child walked across this ground, toward a fire tended by someone like Kaura, through smoke, cold, and the collective warmth of clan life, and then stepped out of time entirely, leaving only these tiny impressions in clay. The research team debated how to preserve the footprints. They could not leave them exposed, and humidity changes would destroy them in a few years. They considered removing the entire floor section, but the risk of damage during transport was too great. In the end, they made detailed casts and digital models, then carefully reburied the original footprints under protective sediment. So the footprints remain in the cave, in the dark, preserved as they have been for 30,000 years. Only the casts and photographs are visible to us. Copies of copies, shadows of presence. They say I was real. I walked here. I lived. Minus bar for echoes of deep time firepower and continuity. At multiple Paleolithic sites across Europe, archaeologists have found something puzzling. Wolf and dog bones, mixed with human remains. Not as food. These bones show no butchering marks, no evidence of processing for meat, or marrow. The bones are complete, or broken only in ways consistent with natural decay and geological pressure. No one split these bones to extract marrow. No one cut these carcasses for meat. Instead, they seem to have been left in place after natural death, or deliberately placed in positions suggesting respect. Even at a site in the Czech Republic called Predmost I, excavators found the remains of over 30 mammoth hunters buried together, accompanied by several complete canine skeletons animals, and might have been early domesticated dogs, or wolves in the process of being domesticated. The scale of this burial, its apparent creating was extraordinary. The human bodies were deliberately arranged in specific patterns. Many wore ornaments carved ivory beads, pendants of foxed teeth, shells that must have been traded from regions hundreds of kilometers away. The burial required immense labor digging into frozen earth, placing the bodies, covering them with soil and stones. And among these carefully interred humans, with equal care, lay those canines. The question that haunts researchers: what was the relationship between these humans and these animals? The traditional narrative says early dog domestication began around 15,000 years ago, when wolves began scavenging near human settlements, gradually adapting to human presence over generations, eventually developing a symbiotic relationship. The story goes wolves, less afraid, more tolerant of humans, had better access to human food waste. These wolves survived better, reproduced more successfully, and gradually over millennia, a population distinct from wild wolves in both genetics and behavior emerged. These were the first dogs. But the finds at Predmost I, dated to 20-7,000 years ago, are over 10,000 years older than the accepted domestication timeline. So, what does it mean these wolves bury humans? Why are they treated with the direct reference, not as food? One theory, soft and speculative, but hauntingly plausible, is this: humans and wolves formed a temporary cold-minus weather alliance. Wolves generate significant heat. They are social animals, used to sleeping pressed close to pack members. A wolf's body temperature is similar to a human's, around 38-39 degrees Celsius. That thick fur provides insulation. A sleeping wolf is, in essence, a warm, breathing furnace. They are also intelligent enough to recognize mutual benefit. Humans had fire, occasional extra food. Wolves had warmth and acute senses for danger. A wolf's hearing and smell are orders of magnitude more sensitive than a human's. Wolves could detect the approach of predators, cave lions, cave bears, giant hyenas, long before humans noticed anything amiss. In the dark of a Paleolithic winter night, that early warning system could mean the difference between life and death. In the harshest winters, when the margin for survival was raven thin, might desperate humans have allowed waters into their shelters? Might they have shared sleeping steeds, each species providing with the other act? The archaeological evidence neither confirms nor denies this possibility. The bones are just there, silent in their arrangement. But researchers note something intriguing at sites where wolf bones appear near human hearths. The wolves are often older individuals, not prime-age animals you would choose for food, but older pack members who might have been less threatening, was competitive, more tolerant of human proximity. Wolf social structure is complex, sometimes brutal. Older wolves that lose status may be driven from the pack. They become solitary, vulnerable, desperate. In winter, an old wolf without a pack is a dying wolf. In fact, an old wolf is also less dangerous. Its teeth are worn, its strength diminished, its aggression tempered by age and exhaustion. An old wolf seeking shelter and warmth might tolerate human closeness in ways a younger, stronger wolf never would. Perhaps, in the deepest cold, there was a truce, grasping the species' understanding that went beyond normal predator-prey or competitor relationships. Perhaps old wolves, cast out from their packs, found refuge in human caves, and perhaps humans, recognizing the warmth and companionship these animals offered, allowed them to stay. Some researchers propose a more specifics in area humans actively sought out and cared for old or injured wolves, understanding that a wolf kept alive through the winter would remain grateful, attached. This relationship would not be passive acceptance, but active cultivation. We will likely never know for sure. The hate leaves almost no trace in the archaeological record that the bones remain together, suggesting connection, dependency, some form of relationship important enough that not even death could separate them. In the frozen dark of a Paleolithic winter, perhaps the boundary between human and animal softened. Perhaps warmth was warmth, regardless of source. Perhaps survival created improbable alliances that our modern taxonomies cannot fully capture. The mystery persists, preserved in bones, waiting in the earth. Perhaps the mystery itself is important. Perhaps not everything about the past should be resolved into clear categories and definitive explanations. Perhaps some things should remain suggestions, possibilities, intimations of relationships we can feel but not fully articulate. Walls buried with humans. That fact alone is enough. On the walls of certain caves, particularly in the Pyrenees region between France and Spain, researchers have found markings that defy simple explanation. These are not the famous paintings, the ochre and charcoal horses, bison, mammoths, the hand stencils, the geometric shapes. Those are remarkable, but their purpose, while debated, falls within recognizable artistic or ritual categories. No, these markings are different, simpler, stranger. Above ancient hearths, on cave walls directly in the path of rising smoke, there are dots, lines, smears of soot, arranged in patterns that seem deliberate, yet resist clear interpretation. At first, researchers thought these were accidental, just such stains, the natural result of fires burning for millennia in enclosed spaces. Smoke rises, deposits the carbon it carries on any surface it meets. Over time, these deposits accumulate into dark stains, natural, random, meaningless, but closer analysis revealed something unexpected. The patterns show evidence of intentionality. The dots are relatively evenly spaced, not perfectly. Paleolithic people had no rulers or measuring tools, but the consistency suggests deliberate placement. The lines follow consistent angles, then the location always directly above hearths, at heights requiring someone to stand and deliberately reach upward suggests these are not random accumulations, but created marks. To make these marks, someone must have taken a charcoal or soot minus covered finger and deliberately pressed it against the rock wall over and over, following some pattern or plan or impulse meaningful to them, opaque to us. Some researchers speculate these might be counting systems, tally marks for something: days, deaths, successful hunts. If so, what were they counting? And why place this record in minus darkened areas where it was difficult to see? The question of visibility is especially puzzling. In the flickering light of a Paleolithic hearth, these marks would have been almost invisible. To see them clearly would require extinguishing the fire, examining the wall by daylight or torchlight. Why create marks deliberately difficult to perceive? Another theory suggests ritual significance. Perhaps the act of marking above the fire itself held meaning. Perhaps smoke was understood as a medium of communication, rising from the human world toward something beyond, carrying messages or prayers or simple acknowledgments of existence. In several caves, the soot patterns form what look like representations of fire itself, rising, branching, flowing upward, as if someone used fire to depict fire, smoke to draw smoke. It seems almost poetic, recording the very thing that made survival possible, extracting something from the ephemeral process of burning, fixing it to stone, making it permanent, giving it a kind of immortality. But we cannot know. The people who made these marks left no explanation. The patterns simply exist, dark against stone, preserved by the very conditions that destroyed so much else. In a cave in northern Spain, researchers found something particularly enigmatic: a series of soot dots above a hearth, 20-8 in total, arranged in a curved line suggesting deliberate counting. 20-8, the approximate length of a lunar cycle, and also the approximate length of a menstrual cycle. To these that possibly represent lunar observation, menstrual tracking, or pure coincidence. The evidence is insufficient to conclude anything definitively, but the possibility of angels. The idea someone, perhaps a woman, sat by the fire night after night, marking time in a way meaningful to her, creating a calendar or a record, or simply a pattern that pleased her. Menstrual tracking would have had practical importance in Paleolithic societies. Understanding fertility cycles would be valuable information, especially in small populations where every birth mattered. A woman who could predict her fertile periods possessed knowledge that affected not just her own life, but the survival of her entire community. But perhaps the marks mean nothing of the sort. Perhaps they were aesthetic. Someone who found beauty in pattern and repetition, who enjoyed the act of creation for its own sake. Perhaps they were playful, a child reaching up to make marks while adults worked nearby, creating something simply because they could. Perhaps they were deeply significant in ways we cannot begin to reconstruct. Perhaps they connected to beliefs or practices or ways of understanding the world that are completely foreign to modern thinking. Smoke rises, marks remain. And we, looking back 20-5,000 years, try to read meaning in the dark. The humility required for this work is profound. We have sophisticated tools, advanced analytical techniques, decades of accumulated research, and yet we stand before these simple marks and can still only speculate. The marks are there, that is certain. Everything else is interpretation. At certain Paleolithic sites, particularly in Russia and Eastern Europe, archaeologists have found burials following a peculiar pattern, bodies interred underneath or immediately adjacent to hearths. Not in the hearths, the bodies were not cremated but positioned so that they rested under the very spots where fires once burned, where ash accumulated, where warmth pooled during life. These burials required significant effort. To place a body under a hearth meant dismantling the hearth, excavating earth, positioning the body, then rebuilding the hearth on top. This was not casual disposal. This was deliberate, meaningful placement, requiring communal labor, planning, and intention. The most famous examples come from the Sunji site in Russia, dated to about 30-4,000 years ago. Here, researchers found multiple burials, including one particularly striking example to children buried together, surrounded by thousands of ivory beads that once decorated elaborate clothing. The grave pit's location, directly underneath a major hearth. The beads alone represent extraordinary investment. Each one was carved from mammoth ivory, a difficult material to work. Each required hours of labor cutting, drilling, polishing. The two children were adorned with a total of roughly 10,000 beads, estimating 1 hour per bead. Facts: 10,000 hours of work. Even with multiple people working, that represents months of sustained labor. The children were not simply placed in the ground. They were addressed, decorated, honored, and then the community chose to rebuild their fire, their source of warmth, the center of their social life, directly on top of these remains. What does this mean? One interpretations suggests a belief connection between warmth and the afterlife. Perhaps fire was understood not just as practical heat, as a spiritual force. Perhaps placing the dead under the hearth was a way to ensure they remained warm in whatever existence followed death. The logic has a certain emotional resonance. In life, fire warmed you. In death, may you rest under eternal fire. This interpretation finds some support in documented burial practices from other cultures and periods. Many human societies believe the dead experience cold, that they need protection and comfort in the afterlife, just as they did in life. The placement of grave goods, clothing, tools, food reflects this concern. But Paleolithic people left no written records, no clear accounts of their beliefs. We can only infer from their actions, not their thoughts. Another interpretation is more pragmatic, but no less meaningful. The hearth was the center of community life. By burying significant individuals under these locations, the community ensured their continued presence. Every fire lit on that spot became an act of remembrance. Every meal cooked, every tool made, every night spent in warmth happened in the literal presence of ancestors. The dead were not separated from the living. They were foundational, grounding, always there beneath the flames that sustained those who remained. This practice did not continue in all communities or all periods. It appears in specific regions, specific times, and disappears from the archaeological record. But when it existed, it created something profound. The physical merging of living and dead, the intertwining of warmth and memory, the coupling of present survival with past sacrifice. Imagine sleeping by a hearth, knowing that beneath the flames, under the ashen stones, someone you cared for rested in the earth. Someone who had once sat where you used felt the same warmth you feel now. Blith that night, did the fire bring differently? Did its warmth carry diesel meaning? We cannot ask the people who practiced these burials, but we can observe what they left behind: evidence of care, evidence of continuity, a worldview in which the boundaries between life and death were not absolute walls, but permeable membranes. The ash layers above these gray pits often show continuous use, spanning decades. Paths were maintained, rebuilt, used year after year. Communities returned to these sites, with fires in the same spot, perhaps because the location offered practical advantages: good shelter, water, strategic positioning. Perhaps because the dead were there, and leaving them meant breaking connection, and connection, even to those beyond speech and breath, was more important than convenience. In some cases, researchers can trace the biography of a hearth: initial use as a simple campfire, gradual development into a maintained feature, eventual burial underneath, continued use for decades afterward, final abandonment when the community moved on or died out. Each phase is clearly readable in the stratigraphy, the layering of ash, soil, stone. These biographies have a narrative quality. They tell stories of important places, of decisions made and upheld across generations, of memory preserved not in words but in repetitive action. The most poignant aspect is perhaps the final abandonment. The last fire lit at these sites was lit by people who did not know they were lighting the last fire, who expected to return, who left thinking they would be back next winter. But they never came back. The hearth grew cold. The ash layers stopped accumulating, and slowly, over centuries, soil covered everything. The site became just another unremarkable patch of ground until archaeologists with a careful methods and patient excavation arrived, bringing it all back to light. As you could see a map of Paleolithic Europe with every discovered hearth marked, you would see something remarkable. Density, every few kilometers, sometimes every few hundred meters, along river valleys and coastal plains. Everywhere there are sites where humans once made fire, ash accumulated. Survival was negotiated night by night, season by season. This density speaks to the fragility of Paleolithic existence. You could not travel far without needing shelter. You could not survive many nights without fire. The landscape was dotted with places of refuge. Each one was a small pocket of warmth in an immense cold. Distances are instructive. In winter, a group moving with children, elders, supplies and tools might cover only a few kilometers a day. The terrain was difficult. No roads, no cleared paths, just wilderness, snow, ice, frozen rivers to cross, hills to climb. Every night required fire. Every night required shelter. The network of known camps and caves formed an infrastructure essential for survival, just as roads and bridges were for later civilizations. But this pattern also speaks to continuity. The same caves, the same rock shelters, the same advantageous locations were used over and over across millennia. Not by the same people. Individual lifespans with shortened populations were mobile, but by successive groups who recognized what made a place suitable: protection from wind, proximity to water, access to gang routes, adequate drainage. How was this knowledge transmitted? How did people learn which caves were good, which shelters were reliable? Some knowledge would have been personal experience. You try a cave. It works well. You remember and return. That some must have been transmitted socially. The elders told the young 3 days north. Near the river bend where the limestone cliffs are, there is a good cave. A distinctive rock formation at the entrance. You'll recognize it. This transmission of knowledge required language, memory, and trust. It required a social world complex enough to accumulate and share information across generations. Good shelters were rare. Good shelters were precious. Knowing where to find them was survival information passed from generation to generation. In this way, the landscape itself became a text, a record of accumulated human experience written in the placement of hearths, in the density of stone tools and the layers of occupation and abandonment. Every hearth discovered today is a word in that text, a small voice from the past saying we were here. We were cold. We made fire. We survived. The repetition is almost liturgical, the same actions, the same solutions, the same desperate, persistent human effort to push back against darkness and cold. Sometimes archaeologists find clearly unsuccessful hearths, used once then abandoned with minimal debris around them, suggesting occupants did not stay long. Perhaps the shelter was inadequate. Perhaps game was too scarce. Perhaps illness or accident forced them to move. These failed hearths are as meaningful as the successful ones. They represent attempts, hopes, efforts that did not work out, but were nevertheless made. One site in Germany shows evidence of a hearth lit, perhaps used for a night or two, then abandoned. The ash layer is thin, debris around it minimal, just a few knap-ed stone flakes, a broken blade, some charred bone fragments from a small meal. Something went wrong. They cannot know what, but the hearth itself testifies to the attempt. Someone arrived, thought it would work, lit a fire, tried to establish camp, then left, moved on, sought better conditions elsewhere. The optimism required to try again after failure is remarkable. To have a plan not work out, to face disappointment and discomfort, and yet still move forward, still seek the next shelter, still believe that survival is possible. This is no small thing. Other hearths show signs of success, deep ash accumulations, evidence of tool minus making unfood processing, nearby burials suggesting people lived long enough to die of natural causes rather than immediate catastrophe. Success and failure, preserved in ash. Through it all, the constancy of fire. Paleolithic humans possessed fire, mastered it, maintained it, had built entire survival strategies around it for tens of thousands of years. Before the periods we've been exploring, fire was not new to them. It was ancient, foundational, so thoroughly integrated into human life that existence without it was unthinkable. The earliest controlled use of fire by human ancestors dates back hundreds of thousands of years, possibly more than 1,000,000. By the Paleolithic periods we're discussing, fire use was not innovative. It was traditional. It was simply how things had always been done. And yet, it always required constant attention, constant care, constant sacrifice of time and resources and sleep. This is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Paleolithic fire use. Its demands never diminished. No matter how many generations had tended flames before you, no matter how routine the process became, fire never became automatic. It always required human effort, always required someone to wake in the dark, always required someone to care. And they did care, across hundreds of generations, across thousands of winters, always someone cared enough to keep the flame alive. The evidence is there, buried in European soil, waiting to be uncovered. Each hearth is a testament. Each ash layer is proof. Each fragment of charcoal is a tiny piece of a larger story about human persistence, human ingenuity, human endurance. We find these traces. We analyze them with scientific rigor, dating methods, spatial analysis, chemical signatures. This is necessary. This is how we learn. But sometimes, if we are honest, we must also simply sit with what we have found. Must acknowledge that these blackened stones on dash layers represent human lives. Real people, real cold, real fear, real hope. They built fires in the dark. They shared warmth with each other, and perhaps with walls. They marked cave walls with soot for reasons we cannot fully understand. They buried their dead under hearths, ensuring warmth and memory intertwined forever. And in doing so, they became us, or we became them. The distinction barely matters. The capacity for care that kept Paleolithic flames burning is the same capacity that makes us pause today and remember them. reconstruct their lives, honor their struggle. When an archaeologist carefully brushes ash from a 20-5-1000-1000-year-old hearth, when they take charcoal samples for dating, when they map the distribution of artifacts around the fire site, these are acts of care, different from the care that kept the original flame burning, but related, connected by the same fundamental human impulse to attend, to preserve, to understand, to remember. Every fire we light today contains, in a sense, a spark of their fire. Every warmth we feel echoes the warmth they fought so hard to maintain. This is not metaphor. The knowledge of how to make fire, how to maintain it, how to use it effectively, has been passed down from the Paleolithic in an unbroken chain, person to person, generation to generation. Someone taught you how fire works, perhaps not explicitly. Perhaps you learn it by observation, by experiment, by growing up in a world where fire is common and controlled. But you learn it, and that learning connects you to every person who ever learned to make fire, all the way back to the first humans who mastered the skill. The flame is continuous, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, still burning today. In a very real sense, the fires we light today are the same fire that burned in Paleolithic caves. The chemical process is identical: carbon-based fuel burning in the presence of oxygen, releasing energy as heat and light. The human relationship to that fire, the need for its warmth, the fear of its absence, the care required to maintain it, these are also continuous. We have changed many of the ways we relate to fire. We have central heating, electric lights, gas stoves. For most people in the developed world, fire is optional: candles for ambience, campfires for recreation. The stakes are no longer life and death, but the knowledge persists. And somewhere inside us, perhaps the old recognition persists to the understanding that fire is precious, that warmth is survival, but someone must care. When we gather around fire today at a campsite, a beach bonfire, a fireplace, a holiday candle, we are enacting something ancient. We are doing what our ancestors did. And perhaps in some small way, I am remembering them. Archaeologists who study these sites often speak of feeling a sense of presence, of connection. They are scientists, trained in rigorous methodology, skeptical of romanticism, and yet they report this feeling that the people who left these traces are somehow still present in them. Heith of not just an object, it is an action frozen in time. Someone gathered fuel, someone arranged stones, someone lit a flame and kept it burning. All of that effort, that intention, that carrot remains preserved in ash and stone. To study these sites is to touch, however indirectly, the lives of people dead for tens of thousands of years, to reconstruct their actions, to understand their choices, to honor their persistence. This work matters, not because it changes how we live today, though understanding our past does shape how we think about our present and future, but because it changes. These people deserve to be remembered. Their struggle deserves recognition. Their success deserves celebration. They survived under conditions that would kill us in days. They endured winters that would break us. They maintained complex social structures, created art, developed technologies, raised children, buried their dead with honor. They were fully human as we are, and our humanity demands acknowledgments. Every hearth excavated is a form of that acknowledgement. Every careful analysis is a statement. You mattered. Your life had meaning. We remember. Have perhaps, in the end, that is what the hearth itself was always about. Not just warmth, though warmth was essential. Not just survival, though survival was the immediate need. But need, connection, continuity, the affirmation that we are not alone in the dark. The Paleolithic people gathered around their fires knew they were part of something larger than themselves. They knew others had sat where they sat, had warmed themselves at similar fires, and faced similar challenges. And they knew, or at least hoped, that others would come after them, that the fires would continue to burn, but the knowledge would be passed on, that the struggle would not end in darkness, but in continuation. They were right. We are here. We remember them. The fire still burns. As long as we remember, as long as we honor their persistence, as long as we acknowledge the common humanity that connects us across vast gulfs of time, the flame remains continuous, burning through the ages, warming us still, lighting the way forward by reminding us of the depths from which we have come. Minus Part 5. The long winter ends. The flame endures. And thou, we reach the journey's end, running from the frozen past, from the world of caves and smoke and endless struggle against the cold. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the story settle. Let the distance between their world and ours become clear again. 20-5,000 years is a span of time almost unfathomable. If you try to count backward at 1 year per second, you would need to count continuously for nearly 8 months. To reach the winter nights, we have just wandered. 8 months to bridge the gap between your warm bed and their icy cave. In that immense gulf of time, so much has changed. So much has been built, discovered, transformed. The people we have been remembering terrain to run, the unnamed hunters and gatherers, the child who left footprints in clay, could not have imagined the world you inhabit now, could not conceive of electric lights that banish darkness at the touch of a switch, could not imagine heating systems that maintain constant warmth without anyone waking to add fuel, could not imagine insulation in thermostats and the casual abundance that defines modern comfort. For then, warmth was a negotiation with barely controlled forces, a desperate maintenance of small flames against overwhelming cold, a nightly uncertainty about whether dawn would come. For you, warmth is expected, assumed, something that only causes concern when it fails, and even when heating fails or power goes out, a concern is relatively brief. Help is available. Solutions exist. You live in a world transformed by the cumulative human effort of hundreds of generations. Every technological advance, every innovation, every tiny improvement in how we create and maintain warmth has led to this moment. You could lie in a bed in a controlled climate, with no immediate threat from the elements. This is an extraordinary gift, easily overlooked because it is ubiquitous, taken for granted because we have never known otherwise. But it was purchased with the effort we have been describing, with the fire-keeper's sleepless nights, with the hunter's frostbitten fingers, with the quiet sacrifices of people who burn their own possessions to keep flames alive in impossible winters. They did not do these things specifically for you. They did not know you would exist. They were simply trying to survive each night. But their survival across millennia accumulated and compounded, becoming the foundation upon which everything else was built. Agriculture required settlements. Settlements required reliable winter warmth. Reliable warmth required fire technology sophisticated enough to heat larger structures for longer periods. Every development built upon previous developments. Every generation inherited the knowledge of those before and added their own small improvements, until the chain of human effort stretched from the first controlled fire to the climate-controlled world you inhabit. The caves are still there, silent, mostly empty now except for researchers who visit periodically, documenting, studying, trying to read meaning from ashen stone. The hearths are cold, have been cold for thousands of years. The last flames that burned in those ancient fire pits went out long before written language, before agriculture, before civilization in any form we would recognize. That the pattern remains. The circular arrangements of fire-cracked stones, the layers of compacted ash, the charcoal fragments that can still be dated, identified, analyzed. These remnants are not dramatic. No one visits expecting the grandeur of pyramids or the elegance of Greek temples. They are simply there. Subtle shadows on cave floors, discolorations on stone, evidence that requires patience and expertise to interpret. And yet, they are profound in their own way, because they represent something universal, something that connects all humans across all time: the need for warmth, the drive to survive, the willingness to care for each other however imperfectly in the deepest dark. When an archaeologist discovers a new Paleolithic hearth, they are discovering a place where someone once knelt to blow life into embers, where someone once added fuel with skilled hands, where someone once felt relief as warmth spread into cold air. They are discovering evidence of care, of sustained attention, of the kind of persistent human effort that rarely makes it into grand historical narratives, but which made all history possible. The people who tended these flames left no names, no monuments, no lasting mark on the landscape except ash, but they succeeded in their task. They kept the flame alive. They survived. They passed forward, both their genes and their knowledge. And you are here, the inheritor of their success, lying in warmth they could not have imagined, connected to them by an unbroken thread of human persistence. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you do not need to worry about the fire dying, do not need to wake in the dark to add fuel, do not need to sacrifice your possessions to maintain warmth. You have been freed from those necessities by the accumulated progress of your ancestors, by the countless people whose names are forgotten, but whose efforts persist in the technologies that surround you. If that's worth acknowledging, worth feeling grateful for. If gratitude is an emotion that can still find you in these quiet moments before sleep, you are warm because someone once scared. So any summons. An unbroken chain of care stretching back to the beginning of human use of fire, and that care was not abstract. It was concrete, practical, embodied. It was a mother checking a child's hands for frostbite. A hunter sharing his prey with an other. A fire minus keeper waking multiple times a night to maintain the flame that protected sleeping clan members. It was Kaura burning her sleeping board to warm others. It was Tarat returning to the fire with frozen hands. It was the unnamed women ending sacred flames in deep caves. It was the child who walked across clay toward warmth on a cold day 30,000 years ago. They all contributed. They all mattered. In a sense, they are all present in the comfort you feel now. The warmth you experience is not just the product of technology. It is the product of hair accumulated across time, passed down like the fire itself, generation to generation. Just imagine for a moment you are back in that cave. Your comfortable bed becomes cold stone. The steady warmth surrounding you is replaced by drafts and smoke and the uncertain heat of a fire that must be carefully rationed. Imagine hunger as a constant companion, not the temporary hunger of a missed meal, but the deep, persistent emptiness that shapes every thought, every movement, every decision. Imagine knowing that if you sleep too deeply, you might not wake, that cold can take life without drama, that warmth is not guaranteed, that survival requires constant vigilance. Imagine this is your reality. Not for a night, but for a season. For a lifetime, generation after generation. Then, return to where you actually are warm, safe. The struggles that consumed your ancestors reduced to abstract historical curiosity. The threats they faced daily rendered harmless by technology and social organization. The contrast is staggering. The gift is immense. You have done nothing to earn this comfort except be born into this time. This place, this moment in human history where warmth is abundant and cold is merely an inconvenience. But perhaps that recognition itself is valuable. Perhaps understanding what you have been spared, the struggles you did not need to face, creates a kind of perspective, a gentleness toward yourself and others, a recognition that existence, even now, even in comfort, contains challenges enough without adding the trials your ancestors endured. They fought the cold so you would not have to. They maintained the flame under impossible conditions so that eventually humans could develop systems that made fire minus keeping unnecessary. Their gift to you is freedom. The freedom to concern yourself with other things, to think thoughts beyond survival, to create, to dream, to rest without fear. This is what they purchased with their discomfort. This is what their persistence purchased. And you are the beneficiary, lying in warmth, drifting towards sleep, carrying within you the capacity for terror that kept them alive through endless winter nights. The world outside your window continues. Day tends to night. Thief of tang, following the same rhythms that govern Paleolithic lives, though we now experience them with such different certainty. Freeness still comes, though in the devout world it has lost most of its teeth. Cold still exists, though we have learned to push it away from our bodies, our homes, our lives. The fundamental forces have not changed. The earth is still tilted on its axis. creating seasons. Wind still blows, snow still falls. The physics of heat loss remains constant. What has changed is our relationship to these forces. We are no longer at their mercy in the way our ancestors were. We have insulated ourselves, technologically and socially, from the immediate life minus or minus death consequences of winter cold. This is progress, unquestionably. Very few of us would choose to return to Paleolithic conditions to face those struggles directly, but perhaps, having remembered them, having spent time considering their lives, we can carry forward a trace of their awareness, an appreciation for wars, a recognition as its value, a gratitude for the comfort we inhabit, not a dramatic gratitude requiring action or demonstration, just a quiet acknowledgement, a soft awareness that settles in the back of your mind as you drift toward sleep. You are warm. You are safe. You are the inheritor of countless acts of care stretching back into the deep past. And in your rest, in your comfort, you honor those who fought so persistently to keep the flame alive. Let the story fade now. Let the images dissolve. The cave, the smoke, the figures huddled around a small fire in an endless cold. They have returned to the past where they belong. You remain here in the present, in warmth and safety. Your breath is steady. Your body relaxes into comfort. The weight of your blanket is a gentle pressure. Nothing like the heavy, itchy furs that defined winter survival. The darkness around you is peaceful. There is no threat in it. No predators, no killing cold, just the ordinary darkness of a night room. Familiar, safe. If you listen carefully, perhaps you can hear the distant hum of a heating system, the subtle background noise of climate control maintaining the temperature that keeps you comfortable. A sound so constant you usually don't notice it, but it is there, working while you rest, performing the function that once required someone to wake every few hours and feed fuel to dying flames. That task has been automated, mechanized, removed from human hands. This is efficiency. This is progress. This is good. But in that mechanism, in the concept of maintained warmth, the spirit of Kaura persists. The care she embodied, the persistent attention to a flame that must not go out, the willingness to sacrifice for the warmth of others. These qualities have not disappeared. They have been translated into different forms, into engineering, into social systems, into the accumulated knowledge that allows us to create warmth without individual martyrdom. But the core remains, the human capacity for care, the human persistence in the face of difficulty, the human ingenuity in solving the problems of survival. You carry this capacity within you, inherited from those who came before, ready to be expressed in whatever forms your particular life requires. But tonight you need not express it. Tonight you can simply rest, can receive the gift of comfort purchased by your ancestors' struggle, can drift into sleep knowing that the flame is tended, that warmth is maintained, that you are safe. The fire continues burning, hand to hand, across time. It still burns, in literal and metaphorical forms, in the warmth that surrounds you, in the care you might show to others, in the persistence of human life despite all challenges. It burns steadily, reliably, with the patience learned across millennia, and you, resting in its warmth, need do nothing but breathe and drift, and allow sleep to come in its own time, gentle and inevitable as dawn after the longest winter. Tonight, the struggles of the past have receded. The cold has been pushed back. The darkness, while present, is not threatening. You are here. You are warm. You are safe. And in the morning when light returns, you will carry forward the gift received tonight, the awareness that warmth is precious, that comfort is earned across generations, that the simple act of resting in safety is itself a kind of victory. But morning is distant still hours away. And in this moment, there is only the present, only the steady rhythm of your breathing, only the gentle weight of sleep approaching. Let it come. Let the story end. Let the past rest in peace while you rest in comfort. The fire burns. The warmth persists. And you, descendant of those who fought the cold, can finally, peacefully, easily rest. Sleep well, traveler. The long winter is over. The fire is tended, and warmth in the morning light will still be waiting.